Welcome to a special Trent University 50th anniversary conversation between University President Dr. Leo Groarke and University Chancellor Don Tapscott. TRENT Magazine is proud to bring together the President and Chancellor not just to celebrate 50 years of teaching excellence, but to take a look ahead at what post-secondary education might look like in the coming years and decades. Dr. Groarke has extensive executive experience acquired at two major post-secondary institutions, Wilfrid Laurier University and University of Windsor. He was formerly Vice President, Academic and Provost at University of Windsor, a 16,000 student comprehensive university. In his role there, Dr. Groarke has had valuable experience in virtually all aspects of university operations, including government and community relations. At Laurier, he spearheaded the development of a new and highly successful campus in Brantford. In partnership with the city, revitalized the downtown. Dr. Groarke brings a unique partnership and fundraising vision to Trent, having raised over $50 million for new programs at both Laurier and Windsor. He has decades of achievement and an international reputation in teaching, research, editorial board membership, conference and institute leadership, as well as authorship and editorial contributions to many critical notes, articles, journals, and books. His areas of research and scholarly interest include ancient philosophy, higher education, the history of ideas, social and political thought, and informal logic. Don Tapscott is a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and one of the world's top business thinkers. Recognized as one of the world's leading authorities on innovation, media, and the economic and social impact of technology, Don has been an advisor to businesses and government leaders and has introduced groundbreaking concepts that are part of our understanding of a rapidly changing world. Don is CEO of a Toronto-based think tank, the Tapscott Group, and was previously founder and chairman of New Paradigm. He is vice chair of Spencer Trask Collaborative Innovations, a new company building a portfolio of companies in the collaboration and social media space. With a master's degree in education from the University of Alberta, he is also an adjunct professor at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto and the inaugural fellow of the school's Martin Prosperity Institute, where he is currently leading a large investigation of new models of global problem-solving, cooperation, and governance. Don is also a best-selling author of 14 widely read books about information technology in business and society, including the wildly popular Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything. Gentlemen, welcome. How shall I address you guys? Dr. Groarke, Leo, Mr. Tapscott, Don?
Ordinarily, I would say Leo. I don't know what's best for the... You tell us what's best for your audience.
I would prefer your eminence.
I was just gonna go.
Don will work.
Sir, Don, Leo, Donald, that's wonderful. Thank you for being here. I'm very honored to be hosting you. We're going to jump right into it because we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to throw some questions out there, give you an opportunity to each answer the question, and if we have a bit of time, then we'll open things up a bit.
I'm keen to hear Don's answers to the question.
I'm keen to hear both of your answers. Well, we'll start with you, Leo. With a new emphasis on professional programs and applied sciences, what will be the value of a liberal arts education in the coming decades?
Let me start by adding a couple qualifications to your question. One is that I think of the liberal arts as the liberal arts and sciences, and I think that is a key component of the liberal arts. The second thing I would say is that there are different ways to teach the liberal arts and sciences. And I would not be sympathetic to all the ways that people teach the liberal arts and sciences, but I would say that if the liberal arts and sciences are taught in the best way, they will never go out of date and there'll always be a place for them. And from my point of view, that's because the liberal arts and sciences taught in the right way teach essential skills that are the core of learning and teaching and being successful. And they are very, well, they sound like simple skills, but they're not simple skills. How to communicate well with other people, how to assess data and understand it, how to understand scientific research, how to create an argument. And those are the basic skills that are the foundation, I think, of all education. So whatever changes there are to the world and the material that we want to teach, those skills will still be key component skills.
Thank you. Don?
Well, I agree with that. And I think that it kind of gets to what is the purpose of an education. And many people say, well, an education, higher education exists to equip people with the skills they need to meet the demands of labor markets. And for sure, we want young people coming out into the workforce that have the capabilities that are required by business and government and other organizations. But I think that we need a lot more than that. You know, first of all, we need citizens. But also, even within labor markets, increasingly, the skills that you have today will be irrelevant tomorrow. And that every student, when they come into the workforce, will have to reinvent their knowledge base multiple times throughout their lives. So it's not just what you know that's important when you graduate. It's your, as Leo said, your capacity to think critically, to put things in context, to understand the interrelationship between things, to collaborate, to execute projects, to solve problems. And these are the kinds of things that are required for a knowledge economy and for lifelong learning, which each of us is going to have to do. So, I mean, by all means, we need people with good professional development in the professions. And for many of those, that begins right in square one in year one of a university. Nursing would be a great example. But I would encourage anyone who's developing their profession in higher education to also take some liberal arts and sciences education. There's this big discussion about STEM. We need more STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Well, that may be true, but let's throw an A in there, STEAM. Yeah. You know, we need the arts as well. I'd also encourage any art student to take some more professional development type stuff, even if they don't go into that particular profession. I think it's a good idea for everybody to learn how to program, because it's like learning a second human language. It's like developing your mind and your capacity to be able to think in very different ways.
Can I pick up on a couple of things? And I think we're on the same page, and I very much like what Don is saying in this regard. I would want to say that I think the best professional training has a very significant component of liberal arts and sciences. And, you know, that's recognized in, for example, law school. You don't go directly into law school. The idea is to get a broad-based understanding first and then go into law school. I think the best business programs will make this a part of it. The second thing I'd like to add, though, is I do think that we're sometimes indulgent when those of us who are professors of liberal arts and sciences, and I am one of them, sometimes we're a bit indulgent, and we think that you can justify any way of teaching the liberal arts and sciences. I don't believe that. If you teach a history course that is just the memorization of dates and names and places, you're not teaching the essential skills. So I would want to emphasize that they're indispensable, but it is important to think about how we teach them in a way that creates that critical thinker, that open-minded person, that person who can continue to learn.
Wonderful. And I think both of you have actually pushed towards the very next question, and I'm going to throw it towards you, Don, first. And you are alluding to it already, dealing with technology, particularly programming, things like that. And modern technology has definitely made its way into the secondary and post-secondary classroom. How has this changed the nature of university learning? And what kind of new changes do you see on the horizon from a technology side of things?
Well, personally, I think that we're in the very early days of a fundamental change to the nature of pedagogy, and that the digital revolution will change education and higher education in a way that was no less revolutionary than the way the printing press, as a previous communication revolution, changed education. But to me, the focus should not be on the technology. The focus is on the model of pedagogy. That the way that education, K to 12 and universities has worked for many years is focused on teachers teaching. Teachers transmitting knowledge and information to students who in many cases were required to bring this information into short-term memory and through practice and repetition to build deeper cognitive structures so they could recall it when you're tested. As Leo, was alluding, this is not what we require. We don't need kids whose heads are stuffed with facts. We need kids who have capacity and capability, and so the technology can help us with that in a very simple way. To me, anything where there's a right or wrong answer, where there's mastery, almost in all cases, the best way to learn that is an interactive computer-based software program that's self-paced, where you test yourself, it's focused on you as an individual learner. And then that frees up the professor or the teacher from being a broadcaster of information to do what only humans can do, which is to motivate students, to work with them, to get them, challenge them, to get them to think differently, to enable them to collaborate, to execute projects. So where there's a right or wrong answer, interactive, computer-based learning, freeing up students to come into and that doesn't happen in the classroom. Freeing up students to have an emphasis on what happens at TRENT, which is small group discussion and conducting projects. And that's where the really important learning will occur. And I think that we're still in the early days of understanding this. MOOCs are now like a tidal wave, massively open online courseware that are hitting post-secondary education, and many view it as a threat. I view it as a big opportunity to do exactly what I was describing. But we're also, there are going to be really tough choices for every learner, like what do I remember in biochemistry and what do I remember off board? Maybe I need to know a few fundamental dates. One was Confederation or the Declaration of Independence or the War of 1812 or something like that. But maybe rather than stuffing my head full of facts, I want to develop my random access capabilities. These kids going into first year today, when they graduate, they'll be able to, through Google Glass or something like that, be able to do inquiries real time. There's still some stuff you need to remember, of course, but this is going to be an interesting gray area for young people to figure out.
We're going to actually, I'm glad that you bring up the whole notion of Google Glass, and I'm one of those people who walks around and Siri tells me every fact that I need at the drop of a hat. And we're going to get back to that in a second. I really want to capture that because I have some questions about how technology is affecting learning in that way. But back to the original question of what you see on the horizon for university education, some of the changes that technology are bringing. Leo.
So I would say I think of the learning environment in terms of what some people call different communication cultures. And that there are societies where the communication culture is oral. It might just be oral, or it might be oral and it might be mixed with books. I think it's true that the printing press changes everything, and then there is an ascendancy of the printed word, and there's a kind of printed communication culture. And then there is broadcasting, and that's a whole other culture. That's Marshall McLuhan. And I certainly agree that there's now a digital revolution, and I think it fundamentally changes things. I would say that this is about a move from an old paradigm to a new paradigm. I think, as is often the case with old paradigms, that we have not managed that shift as well as we might. And I think, there's always skepticism about the new paradigm. I think we need to accept that it's a different paradigm. Some of the basic skills will still be the same, and we need to ask ourselves, what is it about this new paradigm that requires us to change the way that we teach? And I'm just going to give you one example. One example would be when you move from the print communication culture to the digital communication culture. The digital communication culture is far more visual than the print communication culture. The ease with which we produce images today, the ease with which we transport images, you know, in a medieval manuscript, there may be images in a few books, very rarefied, very special kinds of books. But it really is true that something fundamentally is changing. And I think what we need to think about and what challenges us is to think now, okay, we've got this whole new world of visual images, a kind of visual literacy. How do we make that part of the education system? And I would say that more broadly about the digital world. I think we have a long way to go, and that's a challenge, and I would just say we have to take it seriously.
I think so too. And it's funny, this access to image and this access to information, when kids today who have been brought up in a wired culture, they have the universe of fact and the university of knowledge and the universe of opinion on them at all times. They are walking around with what would have been seen as little supercomputers, and it's almost turned them into artificial polymaths who have this repository of knowledge everywhere with them, and also demand that so quickly. As a result, they're used to knowing things at the drop of a hat. So raised in this wired world, today's students absorb information in a wholly different manner than that of even a single generation before. So what are the qualities and practices of an effective educator in the classroom of today or the next decade as we get Google Glass, as our phones continue to give us more and more information?
I think Leo's best to answer that, but why don't I start off with a sort of some pre-work on the question, which is you threw out a statement that I'm not sure everyone would agree with, but I do.
Okay.
That this is a generation that learns differently. And if that's true, there are big implications.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's true for a very simple reason. The baby boomers, my generation,
Mm-hmm.
grew up watching 24 hours a week of television. And we came home from school and we turned on the TV. In fact, we grew up in a whole sort of broadcast culture. I was broadcast to by teachers at school. I came home and I watched TV and I was broadcast to. On Sunday, we went to school, to Sunday school and to church, and we were broadcast to. I grew up in the baby boomer family where the communications all went one way. You know, it was like mom reported to dad and the kids reported to mom. And this was enshrined in popular culture. Father knows best and so on. And I never, ever challenged my parents on anything that they said until I was, well into my late teens. And so I was kind of cool with that whole broadcast thing. But here's the thing. Kids today, they come home and they don't turn on the TV and be the passive recipient of someone else's video. The TV may be on, but it's in the background. It's like music. And what they're doing is they're in their mobile device, their laptop or whatever, and rather than being the passive recipients, they're the actors, the initiators, they're the authenticators, the scrutinizers, the organizers, the composers, the rememberers. And they're telling their stories, they're checking facts and so on. And this is affecting brain development, because 1/3 of all of brain development happens in extended adolescence between the ages of 8 and 18. And if you're the passive recipient of somebody else's content, you get a certain kind of brain. If you're the initiator, you get a different kind of brain. Now that's for kids coming into the universities today. The next generation, this is affecting brain development at the age of 1, because kids are on an iPod-y. They're being toilet trained with an iPad.
Yeah.
And so to think that we can have a model of pedagogy that's about teachers teaching others and transmitting data and information to passive recipients, I think is really illusory. So the most powerful force to change the schools is in fact the students, because we need to embrace these new communications media because that's the best way to help them learn. And that changes everything about what is a teacher and how you teach.
In the talk that Don gave this morning, I thought he very well described the new environment. I just mentioned a couple of things. I think some of the basic things that a teacher needs to do remain the same. A good teacher, for example, challenges students, and a good teacher teaches students to look at opposing points of view and not just to reinforce their own views. So some of that stays the same, but I wouldn't agree entirely that it's a more interactive environment, and people use the term often, and sometimes I don't like the way this term is used, but that it's a non-linear environment. So the traditional ways to line things up in an order, and A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, it leads to a conclusion. And of course, books are to be written that way. Of course, I like books that are written that way. They all lead to the punchline or the conclusion. But that's not how you really read a web page, and that's not, I think, how younger people deal with the world. They jump here, there's something that interests, and there's a link, and then they go to that page, and then they go from that page to another page. So there is something different there, and the good teacher will, in a healthy way, respond to that. I actually think that always good teachers pay attention to where the students are. It's interesting what you said this morning, that the lecture model becomes a kind of time to catch up on your sleep when the professor forgets about where the students are. And it's true that in the traditional lecture, that's what people do. But a really good lecturer thinks about what are the students thinking about, where they are. I'm going to start there. I'm going to anchor what I do in that. But I do think it is a different environment, and there will have to be a different approach. Exactly how that works out, that's an interesting question to be pursued and investigated.
It's funny because Trent has always had a collaborative learning emphasis, particularly in the arts, where the tutorial model is the one where people are brought together, and it is as much about discovering through talk as it is through discovery through listening. And I'm wondering, in a world where collaboration and discourse through media has become, through social media has become so important, if that kind of style of education is something that's going to become more the norm through social media.
Well, yeah, I think, it's kind of a rhetorical question, yes. And the opportunity for a place like Trent to meet. And by the way, I'm the Chancellor. I have no operational responsibility here, so you can take it or leave it, whatever I have to say. But, that when I was at Trent, there were 1,400 students at max, I think, in our fourth year. And you had a small class size, so you could do that. Today, for economic reasons, all of these institutions have had to get larger. But again, through the use of technology, we can have our cake and eat it too. We can free up all that huge time and resource in universities that are focused on teachers, transmitting information to students. Let the technology do that, and that frees up the teachers and the students to do what Leo is talking about.
I would say that unfortunately, to some extent, universities have moved in the opposite direction, and that's because of fiscal pressures. I would give an example. I won't mention the institution, but one of my sons went to an institution where in the first 2 years of his courses, and he was it's a very science-based program, all his classes had 800 students in the class. And I think what we have to do is we have to find a more Trent model, and I think we need creative solutions. The fiscal pressures are real, and it's too easy for universities to deal with those fiscal pressures by simply accepting more students. You turn the faucet on, the more you accept more students, that brings in more revenue, but how do you deal with those students? You have bigger and bigger classes. And I think the creative sorts of things that Don is talking about, that's what we have to look for. And certainly I think Trent is in a much better place than most universities from this point of view. But to maintain that will require some creative thinking in the future.
So imagine a math or science class where there are 800 students, but you have 800 professors. See, that's essentially what you can do. The technology replicates the ability of the professor to help a student master facts, or master procedures, or skills. And again, then you have a real human professor dealing with a small group and pushing them, challenging them, motivating them, getting them turned on, getting them angry, getting them whatever, to cause them to develop the deeper sort of cognitive capabilities that are really the important stuff in learning in the 21st century.
All of which is going to, of course, cost money. We talked about the TAP, and it's whose hand is on the TAP right now, and how that money flows is changing drastically on the university landscape. I think both of you are well versed in the areas of finance. I'm going to go to you, Leo, with your fundraising background for universities first. And the importance of secure funding is a major issue in the modern university landscape. How does the increased national and multinational corporate funding shape both the content and the practice of education?
So I would want to broaden the question. I mean, where I would start is with what at least I perceive to be the reality, that certainly in the short term, and I don't know if that's 10 years or if it's longer, in the short term there are going to be pressures, and to some extent I expect severe pressures on universities from a financial point of view. And it's not in a way complicated in that the reason is because governments are struggling with deficits. Governments are determined to cut back on deficits. If you look in Ontario, the government has committed to cutting $12 billion from its operating budget. When you talk about those size of cuts, it's healthcare and education, and maybe given the kind of critical role that health plays in all our lives, maybe it's more education. So those pressures are going to come. That is going to push and is already pushing universities to look for other sources of funding. And I think they're out there. Part of that is philanthropy. Part of that is people who believe in what the mission is. Part of it is partnerships. I wouldn't say they are never partnerships with a corporation. They might be. But of course, there might be partnerships with a service organization. There might be partnerships with some health care organization, which is a non-governmental organization. Those partnerships will probably be an important part. Might be a municipal government. So there will be, I think we will have to succeed and be able to teach the way we want to teach. We will have to look for those partnerships. Of course, it's important that we don't sell our soul for that, but I don't believe that we have to. I think there are lots of possibilities out there, but I do believe that the funding issues are going to push us to look for those opportunities, and that we'll have to look for them.
Don?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of above my pay grade to talk about this one, but yeah, I think that's true. And people who say that there's absolutely no role for corporations and partnerships, I think are wrong, because we are moving more towards a multi-stakeholder model of everything in society, rather than just governments, for example, solving global problems through state-based institutions like the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF, and the G8, and so on. We've now got multi-stakeholder networks that involve governments, civil society, companies, individuals working together to achieve common self-interest. The rub is for universities how you architect it. I mean, we don't want to move to an environment where, you know, this lecture is brought to you by Coke or something like that, or this, you know, or where there's embedded advertising in the content of interactive software. But there are all kinds of ways that companies can make a contribution beyond just philanthropy or beyond individuals.
Do you know, I would say, picking up on this point, that it's important not to be simplistic about corporations or any kinds of partnerships. The right corporation, whether that's maybe Google that wants to work with people in IT that are studying IT, or a new venture that's doing something good and wants to work. I think of a venture I had some knowledge of at another university, which was developing software for social work. And the university I was at has a social work program, and there was a huge positive opportunity to work together. Of course, when we do that, we've got to keep some things in mind. One, we need to protect freedom of expression. That's a key component and virtue of the university. So we're not going to accept partnerships that somehow curtail the ability of the people who work at university to say what they need to say. But I think it would be a mistake to say that all partnerships of that sort are a mistake.
Well, and there's another side to this, thinking about it, that increasingly, there's not just a period in your life where you learn and then a period where you work. Mm-hmm. You know, that's kind of the way that we used to think about things. But increasingly, you learn lifelong, mm-hmm. and it makes a lot of sense for work to get better integrated into your formal education through mentorships, through summer jobs, of course, but also through internships, through various projects where a company or any institution may have an interest in that project and support it or participate in it. And this is part of the previous issue of solving the sort of liberal arts and science dilemma too, is that sure, you're studying history or something, but you're also working in a project where a company is involved in that project and where you start to get some experience and understand the corporate world. The other thing is that increasingly entrepreneurship is going to become more and more important. Most jobs are created by smaller companies. So I think that over the next period we'll see entrepreneurship become more important and infuse itself more into higher education. And it's not just like in the business schools, it's going to be like in the humanities or the whatever. Maybe you're studying a foreign language and you want to develop some cool little application in that language, or some application that enables people to learn that language, or to, you know, exploit knowledge of being capable in that language, and so on. I can see a time when many students will graduate not just with a capability, or not just with an idea about what profession they might want to go into, but with an actual job that they've created.
You know, I did want to say that I actually think there's a great example of this at Trent already, the TCCBE, which places students in the community doing research work essentially for organizations, for a variety of different kinds of organizations. So that kind of move towards experiential learning, you know, we have a good base at Trent to pursue that, I think.
I'm a huge fan of the TCCBE. I'm a former chair of the TCCBE, and I take a look at them working at a grassroots level, and them managing the relationships between the university, NGOs, small businesses, all these things going on behind the scenes. And it's a wonderful marriage, and quite a bit different than the relationship that you'll often see between a biology department and, you know, a gas company or something. And there's all these things going on, but this is all part of the evolution of how universities work, A, on a learning level, B, on a funding level, C, on a social level. And if we take a look back at the last 50 years at Trent, we've seen massive changes in all three of those, as well as university life in general. I'm not going to imagine that we can look 50 years ahead and guess what Trent University is going to look like. First of all, none of us will be here. I think that's beyond our scope of guessing. But 20 years is a bit more realistic to look at. And I would love to take a snapshot of what you might think Trent will look like in 20 years' time. What's your vision of Trent in 2034? And you've only been here for a month. So
Yeah,
no
I
pressure.
feel like I'm on the spot here. If you come to my installation speech, I'll have something to say about this. I could say a few things. One, I see in 20 years at least 2 thriving campuses. Peterborough, absolutely, but also Oshawa. And I think there are huge opportunities in Oshawa, and there's opportunities for Peterborough and Oshawa to kind of work in a synergistic way that's the best for the university. Who knows? There might be other possibilities for campuses. Those just have to be explored. I'm guessing that there will be a more distributed kind of education. I think more will inevitably happen digitally in various kinds of ways. We'll have more hybrid learning. There'll be different possibilities. I'm actually interested, in the model that you talked about, Don. I think to protect what's really great about Trent, we will need to rearrange the kind of teaching that we do in some imaginative way. And especially as the future's hard to predict, I hesitate at least this point to say much about that, but I do think it will be different from today. Maybe I would add, I think it'll be more international. I think things just become more international all the time. And I hope to support that while I'm here. And that means more people, international people coming here, more of our students and faculty going elsewhere. But it's very much a work in progress at this point.
Don, you've had the joy of being one of the pioneers as a student at Trent University, and now you're back here again in a very hands-on role in 2014. So you've got a bit of background, and that perhaps will help us look forward a bit.
Well, I'm with Leo that it is hard to predict
Yeah.
the future, and a lot of things can change. But you can imagine a future we might try to achieve. And that would be a future where there's a very different model of pedagogy, as we've discussed, but also where the walls between universities and other universities, and also other institutions in society, colleges, and for that matter, companies and governments start to become more porous. And the ivory tower is a term that came about for real reasons. Back in the day, prior to the printing press, the university was a place where they stored the books, and smart people used to hang around where the books were, and they started collaborating and learning from each other, and then people who lacked knowledge would go there and they'd learn from them, and so on. But we created these towers, really. In many ways, there are opportunities to start to collaborate across all of these institutions. I'll just give you an example. Why are there 10,000 statistics professors in the world? I don't know if that's accurate, but a lot, who are each developing their own little notes and PowerPoints and tests and software and class materials and so on to explain what an analysis of variance is. Why don't statistics professors collaborate to develop the best ways and then encode that into software, and then the best ways to create discussions and projects around what is analysis of variance, why does it matter, and how could we use it in all these different situations. So I can sort of see what Chuck Vest at MIT, former president, called a meta-university. Or in macroeconomics, we called this the global network for higher learning, where rather than just sharing stuff like we do today, the professors and faculty would actually collaborate to create a global content.
Interesting. Do you lose the identity of the institution when you're then working at a meta level with other schools?
I think, to me, the institution develops a different identity. You know, it's rather than having the best silos where we have the best little course on whatever, but we do good research that's competitive with all these other researchers. That both of those change quite fundamentally on the research. You know, as I was discussing this morning, we collaborate on research. We start to share data. We create a human genome, for example, of medical research on all kinds of different topics. I'm working with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health that's involved with the University of Toronto Department of Psychiatry. And our identity in the past was we have these great researchers that come up with great stuff. I think our identity in the future will be we have great researchers who are changing the whole paradigm in how research is done, so that we can marshal the knowledge and the information and data and the activities that exist across the world in psychiatric research to start to really crack problems. It doesn't make our identity go away. It changes it, and in many ways it makes us be more important. And there will be those that resist that end up having an old identity being replaced by no identity. So this is about grabbing the bull by the horn to me, and it's about showing leadership to embrace a new paradigm.
You know, I would say there will still be a place for campuses. And I think I would say especially a spectacular campus like the one in Peterborough, but also the one in Oshawa, perhaps because it's in such a vibrant place and such a developing place. And I think actually Trent is well positioned from that point of view. Some of the larger campuses, I'm less sure that the physical campus is going to be important. But I think there will always be campuses, and there will always be professors and roles for professors, but those might change. And so you come to the campus for certain things, and professors do certain kinds of things. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is there is a risk. And the risk is that if we don't change to meet the times, to deal with the student of today, to deal with the digital reality of today and whatever other new realities are coming down the pipeline, then we're very much in a world where other institutions are going to take over. There are private institutions ready to jump into the game. I think they can't do some things as well as we can, but they're quite willing to challenge us. And there are MOOCs, and there are the capacity of an individual person to learn outside of university, I think, is much greater than it was. So we do have to be attentive to the changes. Exactly what they are, I'm not sure about, but we do need to be attentive to them.
One of the things that Trent is known for in this great tradition is that wonderful leveler of university society, and that is the fact that our professors rub shoulders with the students, rub shoulders with the community. And right now we have a whole bunch of community members, professors, and students who are all waiting eagerly to hear what you folks have to say. So I'm letting you off the hook for now. I want to thank you for the time that you've spent with us, and on behalf of Trent Magazine, thank you for taking part in a wonderful conversation. Gentlemen, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.